Coming up this week on the Markcast. Well, here we are. We now live in a world with two competing spring football leagues airing at the same time, 8 games a weekend here, at least for a little bit. Ratings could be better, could be worse. Are we living in a Berenstein Bears situation? Do we have too much vacation, too much TV? How are things shaping out?
Oh, that's it. We're going home. The best vacation ever has been nothing but the worst vacation ever. Nothing has gone right. The cabin, the fishing, the ferries, the stew. It was all supposed to be fun.
Really fun show this week. Somehow wound up with 6 guests again. First off, you love him, you hate him, you love to hate him. We have Dean Blandino, the XFL's VP of Rules and Officiating, stopping back by the program, doing a mid-season check-in with Dean before the playoffs.
Oh, I'm good. I don't, social media, people on Twitter, in officiating, I learned very early on is that you could be really good at what you do and people will still think you're an idiot. So it's fine.
And then speaking of those XFL and USFL TV ratings, we have Ben Fischer coming on from the Sports Business Journal giving his thoughts, as well as Andrew Bucholtz of Awful announcing lots of deep dive analysis into the XFL and USFL's ratings this week.
Getting on a broadcast channel looks like about 80% of the battle right now for better ratings. So, of course, the USFL, because the 2 head-to-head windows were broadcast versus cable, they won both of those. Does that necessarily tell us anything about the popularity of the actual product? No, I don't think so.
The big takeaway for me is that both of these leagues playing at the same time, even if you combine their numbers, they're not as good as some of what we've seen in the past, whether that's for the XFL in 2020 or for the USFL last year. And I think that does maybe add to some of the concerns people had about what would it be like with these 2 leagues playing at the same time.
And then still lots of football talk on the podcast. We are approaching week 10 of the XFL season. Cole Cubelic is coming on of ESPN, previewing the DC Defenders. We're talking the San Antonio Brahmas, everything XFL week 10.
I think the ball's been pretty good. I mean, most of our games have been very competitive. I don't think we've had a game that was completely out of reach going into the fourth quarter. And that always makes it more compelling and more fun.
And then don't think we forgot about the USFL. We have OurSports Central's Paul Reeths, the USFL historian, making his return, previewing USFL Week 2, talking comparisons to the XFL. What does Paul think about them utilizing the old USFL history, all the Herschel Walkers of the world, everything else? And then we even have a player interview for you. We have Brandon Aubrey coming on from your world champion Birmingham Stallions of the USFL 2022. Brandon making his return here for USFL Season 2. We'll get his thoughts. Should be a good show. Thanks as always. Like and subscribe. Hey guys, welcome to the Romancast. Reed here. Should be a good show this week, and do not adjust your dials. This is the Romancast for the week. We are not the Markcast. Paying off a bet to Listener Max, where I had predicted that XFL co-owner Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, DJ as you might refer to him, would be wrestling Roman Reigns at this last month's WrestleMania. I think it was WrestleMania Hollywood. Really thought The Rock would make his return against Roman Reigns, your tribal chief leader. Did not happen. Thus, we are the Romancast for the week. We'll return to the Markcast next week. On a super serious note, before we get into all of these shenanigans today, heartfelt condolences to Chris Smith's family, everybody, all the Sea Dragons teammates, everybody with the XFL staff and ownership and league executives and everyone else hearing about Chris's unfortunate passing this week and news making the rounds. So it's never easy, talking about any of that stuff, especially, mid-season and the XFL and, how do you play football and kind of move on from all of that? The Sea Dragons in a big game this weekend, still just a game more than anything else. And so really just heartfelt condolences. I know that people are, deeply affected by that. And I just want to make sure that we touch on that and just know that everyone involved in that is in our thoughts. And I just I have gotten to know a lot of the people with the XFL, and there's all humans behind all of this, and as much as they try to do for the football and the operations and all of that stuff, this is tragic, and anytime life is lost, and especially kind of in these circumstances, certainly not great. So our hearts, thoughts and prayers go out to that. Hope you guys have seen the messages. I saw Baker Mayfield tweeting about it, and obviously The Rock and everybody else. So we will keep Chris and his family in our thoughts and prayers. Really hope you guys enjoy the episode this week. It's exciting times right now. We've been talking about it a lot in the group chat. Josh Davis, another individual that's left our lives too early. Kind of looking forward to this cavalcade of kind of everything right now with the USFL playing season 2 and the XFL and ratings, and are they good? Are they bad? What are we doing with all of that? Lots to deep dive today. Like I said, Berenstein Bears, too much football right now, too much TV. What do we have going on? I will let you guys decide. Feel free, chime in, the comments and let me know. Too much football, not enough football. Let me know. Special thanks to Dean Blandino for coming on, making time. Everybody with the XFL, I know that's not an easy request mid-season, approaching week 10. Super appreciate that. Obviously, Ben Fischer making the time, coming on with the Sports Business Journal. Hope you guys, I like getting kind of a couple mixed opinions this week. We have Ben on, and then we have Andrew Bucholtz with Awful Announcing. I think it's good to get a couple, various opinions on this XFL, USFL TV ratings rivalry. And then obviously Cole Cubelic coming on, Paul Reeths, and I hope you guys enjoy Brandon Aubrey's interview as well. I thought he was fun. I will check back in at the end of the show. I think that's it for me. We'll see you soon. Well, I'm excited today. We have Dean Blandino back on. We talked preseason, so we're going to check back in during the season. Now we have you, man of your word. Dean, how are you doing?
I'm doing really, really well. Good to be back. Good to chat a little XFL.
So a serious question here. First off, like a welfare check on you. How are you doing? Because every time we always see Dean, everyone's complaining. Dean's the worst ever. All these terrible, how are you doing mental welfare right now?
Oh, I'm good. I don't, social media, people on Twitter, in officiating, I learned very early on is that you could be really good at what you do and people will still think you're an idiot. So it's fine.
Well, you're not an idiot, even though I might have also angrily tweeted at you from the Sea Dragon sideline for one of those DPI calls. So. We're approaching week 10. I've of course collected a bunch of questions we have from people we'll get to, but are we better than you would expect right now? Worse than you would expect? Level of quality of officiating.
I think we're in a good place. Look, when you're talking about bringing a group of officials together, that these crews, they've never worked together before. Like some officials work in the same conferences. Maybe they worked together in 2020, but for the most part, all of our crews were new coming in. They're learning a new set of rules. They're going from college rules to XFL rules. They've got to learn the differences. And I feel like we're in a good place. Look, officiating is never perfect. There's always going to be, we've missed calls. There's things that we could improve upon. But overall, I feel like we're in a good place. Number of fouls per game is right around 15.5 per game, which is right where the NFL, the historical average, has been for the NFL for a long time. And that means that we're officiating the game. We're getting the fouls that we have to get and not being overly technical. So I think we're in a good place.
Quality of play, especially now, all the games matter this weekend. We're seeing a lot of parity and coming down to the wire. Are you as the officiating person, as a fan, as someone with the league, are you excited to see that?
No question. And just like the officials, the players needed time to gel, and we can see it. I mean, we've had less false starts, less illegal formations. The teams are getting better as they start to continue to gel. And what's awesome is that we're averaging just over 8 points in terms of margin of victory. So we're averaging for the season a 1-score game. So every game has been close. So many of our games have come down to not just the last minute, the last play. And like you said, week 10, every game matters. That's what more could you ask for?
Well, it's terrifying if it's the other way, right? If it comes down and we got to we want viewership and we got to get the games up and we've got to talk about them. And if you have a bunch of games of 0-8 teams that don't matter, I mean it really is the best world right now. I think for everyone involved with the league, I think this is tremendously exciting.
Yeah, no question. And even the teams that are eliminated from the playoffs, they have something to play for, right? They want to be the spoiler. They want to be the ones. They're competitors. And so I'm excited. I'm excited for all of the games. And obviously, you look at St. Louis and Seattle have to win, and then could go to tiebreakers. Arlington has to win. San Antonio could get in. It's really exciting.
Yeah, we all have some tiebreaker stuff here. How much does your being involved with the NFL and all that? How much does that influence your decision making here when you're looking at things?
Well, it certainly helps. My experience with the NFL has helped me as you navigate through different situations, because I can rely on that experience. And I've been through a lot with the NFL, and I can take that kind of that institutional knowledge and transfer it to what's happening with the XFL, whether it be the competition committee, the rules discussions, things with officials, and that's been really helpful. My experience has I've always kind of leaned back on that, my time with the NFL, and it's really helped because we've, this year, you're talking about new rules, you're talking about a new league, and you want everything to go well, and it really has, and we've been, just really excited.
Are you trying to deviate from certain rule interpretations? We've seen, especially like the Seattle and the DPI, and we don't have to kind of have our back turned. Are you trying to reinterpret any of that stuff or follow along with what's been traditional?
Well, I think we're sticking to the rules, but we have a standard in the XFL of what is a foul and what raises to the level of a foul. And that's what I've been trying to adhere to when we do have a review. Look, if we want it called on the field and the coach challenges it, then we want to make it a foul in replay. And I've really tried to adhere to that and to be consistent. And look, I know there might be situations where not everyone's going to agree with my judgment, but I'm trying to apply a consistent standard so that I'm not looking at a play in week 3 and then in week 10, I'm looking at it from a different perspective and applying a different standard. So I'm trying to make that so the teams understand, hey, here's where the bar is, and we're not going to move it throughout the season.
Are you, and I've seen, we obviously we get the mics and everything, and we get some of these coaches yelling or like, is it hard where you have like, well, send it to Dean, or what does Dean think? I mean, having that interaction there, is that normal? Is it just that we're seeing more of that, or how is that different from maybe?
Yeah, I think I don't know if it's quite, you see that quite as much in the NFL or college football, but I think it's great because I can hear what the coaches are saying. And there have been times when whatever coach is giving the officials a hard time, and I'll get in the officials' ear and say, hey, just tell him I'll call coach, I'll call him after the game and we'll talk. So, and we have good relationships with all the coaches, and they're competitors and they want to win, and it's emotional. So we understand that. And we understand that officiating can impact games, and we want to make sure that it's not impacting it in a negative way.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Coach Woodson was about to be forcibly removed from the field at halftime there at the DC game. I mean, that was I watched that in real time and just seeing like his mind kind of implode on everything.
Yeah, and those things happen, and our officials understand that, and we're just trying to de-escalate a situation like that.
Something that's exciting. So we had, we've had the coaches challenges, and that we've had a couple this weekend. I've watched Survivor my whole life, and I equated it to, the strategy of the game continues to grow. So now we have this coaches challenge that it seems like, Stoops and Beck kind of almost broke it a little bit, where, hey, we've had this big play go. Well, now someone had to have been holding on that play. Like someone, it's almost like it's the next evolution of that. Like, I got to keep this in my pocket if I'm about to get voted out. What was it like kind of living through that real time? Because it was a really cool moment this weekend.
No question. And we anticipated that. Look, when we put this in, it had never been done before. No, we never, NFL, college, we never said you could challenge anything you want. And the concern going in was, okay, are we going to get a bunch of challenges on that game-ending play where the coach is going to say, find something? So we tried to say, okay, you're only going to get one. Even if you win, you're only getting one. We really wanted it to be saved in case of that emergency, that really significant situation. And we also, that's why we said you have to be specific. You can't say there's a foul on that play, find it. You have to say the left tackle held, or my tight end got there was illegal contact against my tight end during the route. So that allows us to be narrow, because if I have to go in and look at all 22 players and try, that's not what this is designed to be. It's designed to be like Coach Stoops, which was a fantastic example of it. 4th and 4, they throw an incomplete pass. He challenges that their receiver got held. It was there, and the drive extends, and they end up kicking the field goal to tie the game. So that was a perfect use of the challenge. And I think you're right. The coaches are getting better, and they're getting a better understanding of when to use it.
Any thought, and I know because you don't want to open that wormhole of, okay, we have more, but even you get to use it if you get it to get another one. I mean, obviously you'll look at stuff in the off season, or are you pretty firm on the one?
I think we're going to talk about that in the off season, and I can see it both ways. The coach says, well, why do I have to fix an officiating mistake with my challenge, and then I'm done for the game? And I get that. But if you add another one, then you become more liberal with your first one, and then it goes away from what we're talking about, really the game-changing, the game-impacting play. And so I think it'll be a good, healthy discussion in the offseason. I'm not opposed, either way. I liked keeping it narrow year one just to see how it went. And then we'll take that data and we'll look at the information, and we'll have a discussion with all of our people and the coaches, football operations, and see where we land.
But yeah, it really does feel like kind of this immunity idol. Like I'm pulling it out, it's just, I just kind of like visualizing these, because it's been interesting for us to track these rule changes, right? We've seen AJ Smith, really be able to utilize the comms, and we're talking to people, and certain of these coaches have like figured out different strategies to use, and then some have not. And so, it just breathes new kind of life into the game, if that makes sense.
No question. And anytime you introduce technology and coaches, and I dealt with this with the NFL. The NFL, there are some coaches that don't want to bring in video on the sideline, right? Because they feel like, well, now I've game planned, I've done my homework, and now that's going to benefit a coach that isn't as good at game planning and adjusting on the fly. And so whenever you introduce that technology, you're going to have to adapt and use it. And the coaches that adapt quicker and use it better are going to be successful. And that's what we're seeing.
In terms of the comms, it seemed like early on we had some comm issues for some of the games, especially at the Cashman Fields of it all, which, that's a whole bit like, have we resolved that? What was going on with that? Or how do we work to implement that?
Sure. There's no question, especially when you're dealing with a new facility. Cashman it's not a football stadium, right? So you're trying to build that in. There's infrastructure, there's things. And look, anytime you're using technology, it's never going to be perfect, right? We're on a Zoom or whatever, and somebody freezes, right? It just happens. And so I think we've gotten a better handle as the season has gone on. We've had less and less interruptions. But again, doesn't matter, NFL, whatever it is, there are always going to be issues, because again, with technology, you're dealing with wires, you're dealing with all, internet, everything else that is happening on game day. And there usually is something that comes up, but we've really done a good job in terms of limiting those, and I feel like we're in a good place.
In terms of the overtime, obviously we had this week and a couple more. Are you surprised or not with maybe the rule changes and trying to get more parity with the league? But we had no overtimes, all of last year in 2020. Now we've had 3 in a couple weeks. So what do you make of that?
Well, we're happy to get a couple of overtime games in. Like you said, we didn't have any in 2020. Any through the first 7 weeks of this season. And I think you're always concerned with the 3 options on the try. Does that create some unusual scoring and less opportunity for ties? It's just the game is, who knows if that really has an impact. But the thing is, all of our games have been close. Like I said at the top, I mean, we're averaging a little over 8 points in terms of margin of victory. And so we really like our overtime. We feel like it's played out. People think it's exciting. Every play is a score or a stop. And we've had 3 exciting games finish with either a score or a stop, which is awesome.
In terms of the 4th and 15 being implemented here, apparently there's some discrepancy where ESPN is mentioning in it where they can use it when the team is tied or trailing, but before the season that restriction maybe wasn't mentioned or it's not in the official rule book. Like, what is the official rule of the 4th and 15 and when can it be used?
4th and 15 is only fourth quarter, and the score, it's either tied or the team attempting it must be trailing. So we didn't want to use it. We didn't want to have it the entire game where we're just eliminating the kickoff. And the other thing is, if, to have a strategy where you're ahead and you're trying to, whether it's take time off the clock, whatever it may be. So we felt like tied or behind fourth quarter was a good place to start. And again, that's another thing that we'll discuss in the off season and see if we need to make any tweaks.
We also cover fan control football, and I think one of the games their first season they kind of broke it where the team just kept going for 4th and 15 every time. So you got to be careful because it can be kind of a keep away there where the other team never even gets the ball back.
Sure, and that was the other. We debated whether to make that an untimed down or let the clock run, and that was part of it. And we decided to let the clock run because what we didn't want is to have a 4th and 15, you score a touchdown, you go for it again, you score a touchdown, and we have multiple plays with no time running off the clock. So it's and I can see both sides of it. And again, it's something we'll discuss in the offseason.
We've had a lot of discussion about the playoff format. Obviously it's hard, 8 teams and, the parity and all of that. And, people are upset because either the Battlehawks or the Sea Dragons are going to go home. Any thought of, division winners and then just the top 2 records, whatever after that, competing and moving on and not, division specific?
Sure. And that's a debate going back to the NFL, right? Where you have a team that wins a division and the wild card team has a better record and the division winner gets the home game, right? And I think the theory and the logic behind it is, the division, you play every team in your division twice. Those games are so critical. And you can tell your fans, if we win our division, we're going to have a home playoff game. And that's irrefutable. And then I think you get into, again, I really feel like those teams are playing each other in the division. If you're successful in your division, then you're going to be in the playoffs. And again, look, we're going to end up with one really good team, whether it's Seattle or St. Louis, out of the playoffs. And that's just the way it goes. And I think we'll revisit that after the season and see, if we want to make any tweaks to that.
In terms of this upcoming weekend and the tiebreakers and all of this, and I mean, there's been, we've had emails come out and like the ESPN broadcast and like I'm DMing Matt Berry, like, hey, there's all these different things going on. And like, thoughts and just mental gymnastics of trying to figure out this tiebreaker situation.
Sure. Tiebreakers are interesting. And even going back to my NFL days, I mean, the NFL, we have 8 tiebreakers in the XFL. The NFL has more, there's 11. And when it comes to playoff, and the last one is a coin toss, right? And it's never happened. It's never happened in the history of professional football where it's coin toss decided a team going to the playoffs. So I think what we see that's unique is that if both teams, Seattle and St. Louis, win, they'll have the same record. They'll be 1-1. They'll have the same division record. And what's amazing is that their strength of victory will be the same. Their opponents that they beat will have had the same record. So now it goes to a 4th tiebreaker, which is very unusual to even get that far, where you're talking about your division rankings as it pertains to points scored and points allowed, which is why, Seattle kicked a field goal at the end of a game, which didn't seem to have any impact on the outcome of the game, but, trying to score more points. So it's really just, it's cool. It's exciting because, these 2 teams are going to have to win. But they're going to have to, keep in mind that those rankings might end up being a, determining factor.
Do you enjoy that, or is this a lot of emails and stuff that just kind of like you're trying to explain all this to everybody?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do enjoy it. It's anytime. Look, when you have 8 teams, 4 in each division, and you're playing 10 games versus the NFL playing 17 now. There's more likelihood that there's less separation, and that's just the reality. And so I think it's cool. I think it drives interest, right? It's exciting, and people want to talk about. Look, the reality is, if we're talking about it, that means we're interested in it, and that means we're going to tune in and be be invested in how the games play out. So I love it.
This is a complex question. I'm going to do my best to read through this. Has there been discussion of simplifying the tiebreaker to just point differential after the first two tiebreakers instead of going with the complex system the NFL uses, which is pretty hard for teams to plan for? Does that make sense to you?
It's a good question. Yeah, and point differential is one of the tiebreakers. It's later on, and I think the theory there is it's much more, or it's more likely that if that were higher up in terms of the tiebreakers, you'd have more teams just trying to run up the score, right? You'd have more teams just doing, what Seattle did at the end of the game. Not that they were trying to run it up, but I think even early on, and that I think that lends itself to things that we don't want. I mean, blowouts, other things, bad blood. I mean, there's things like that. Look, the reality is, it all matters because the rankings, the more you score, the less you give up. It matters. But I think the net points, the differential, I think that was the theory behind just mitigating the opportunities in terms of running the score up.
I got three more for you here. I'll let you get out. I appreciate it. The punting seems to have given the same results in terms of return rate, but it does seem like there's been less willingness for teams to go for it between the 40s. Has there been enough aggressiveness in the go zone this season for what the league has been looking to establish?
Yeah, I haven't looked at the fourth down numbers yet in detail, but it does feel like we are punting more in that kind of no man's land. And look, the punt, and I think that's something we're going to look at, because to be a punter in our league is really tough. I mean, it is really hard, and because the touchbacks come out to the 35. If you kick the ball out of bounds, it comes out to the 35. And so I think we want to look at that and maybe bring that back in, and maybe we, limit those restrictions on the punters and things like that. And we'll see what happens in terms of at the end of the season, looking at the fourth down, their attempts, how, are we really down from where we were? Because look, the punt, it's not a touchback is not an exciting play. And so we certainly wanted to prevent that. And we are getting, our return numbers aren't through the roof, but I think, they're solid, and we'll have to look at how we can, kind of beef that up going forward.
Yeah, because we were looking even in the 01 XFL, if the punt was over 25 yards, I guess it was like a live ball. So, I mean, there is other things that you could do with that punt, and the CFL has it where they can recover the kick and get possession. Things to work on with that, you feel like, with the punting situation?
No question. I think that's one thing we're going to look at. Special teams is always, right? The kickoff is unique. Punting game, we have some different rules. So I think that'll be really a focus in the off season, our special teams rules, and do we need to make any tweaks?
And then finally, we still get questions. CFL, any consideration bringing the waggle or any kind of movement, any motion, kind of anything like that?
It's always up for debate. I think the CFL is a great game, and it's exciting. It's a more wide open game because of some of the rules. We wanted to stick to more of American football traditional rules, but we'll have those conversations in the off season. And again, anything we can do to drive interest, to make the games more exciting, we're absolutely open to listening and having those conversations. And we've looked at a ton of CFL rules, and we've had conversations with the CFL early on. So those are definitely in play, and we'll, like I said, everything's on the table in the off season.
Well, Dean, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think you get a lot of grief, and I think you wear it well. And I mean, I could not handle all of that. So I think you do a good job, and we appreciate your time here with just everything with the league. It's a lot of work.
Appreciate you, and yeah, just looking forward to an amazing end of the season.
I'm excited. Yeah, we'll be front row for the Sea Dragons game. So hopefully it all comes down to that. I mean, you couldn't write it that better. Last game of the season could end up having
now. Truthfully, are you? What is in your heart? Would you rather see St. Louis win and then have Seattle have to win and go to the tiebreak, or do you just want to St. Louis to lose and Seattle winning.
Clearly. I have the same energy as Ben DiNucci, our quarterback in chief, of waving goodbye to everybody. So no, very excited because we do this show, but I'm a fan, and we like to sit there, like I said, and get rowdy on the sideline. So it is fun. That's kind of why I do this. So yeah.
Well, Coach Haslett likes to get rowdy on the sideline too.
Well, he likes to threaten.
He's one of my
people.
favorites. He's one of my favorites.
Well, Dean, I really appreciate your time and good luck with everything. It means a lot you came back on.
Thanks.
Well, we have Ben Fischer here today with Sports Business Journal. We just had Austin Karp on a little bit ago as well. I appreciate getting the outside perspective here as we live in the minutia. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Happy to be here.
Ben, so we have your article here. I'll get ready to share, USFL Week 1, XFL Week 9, the overlapping, all of that stuff. What did you make of everything coming out of the weekend?
I think it's basically what the stories suggested even ahead of time, that the real difference is broadcast versus cable. There's just more. You're more likely to stumble into Fox, ABC, or NBC or ABC than you are ESPN 1 or 2 or Fox Sports 1 or 2. So, the extent to which, getting on a broadcast channel looks like about 80% of the battle right now for better ratings. So, of course, the USFL, because the two head-to-head windows were broadcast versus cable, they won both of those. Does that necessarily tell us anything about the popularity of the actual product? No, I don't think so. I think it's, it's not at all clear to me to what extent people are choosing one or the other, or just kind of interested in watching both. And for right now, the numbers, it's maybe in a few weeks we'll get some clarity on that. But for now, it looks like they're both in similar spots, I think, strategically.
You haven't tracked it as much during the season, but obviously now you're kind of looking at it, from a God view, kind of looking down. What do you make of these numbers, and is this a worthwhile endeavor?
Yeah, I think only people inside who know exactly how much the XFL and USFL are spending can really say what a good ratings number is. If you're really able to do this cheap, 800, 900,000 viewers is maybe okay. I used to cover Olympic sports where, a pro volleyball tournament, a year and a half before the Olympics starts might be okay with 800 or 900,000 viewers. So it's all about your expectations. Certainly the NFL wouldn't view that as good. However, at 800 or 900,000, which is where the broadcast games this weekend were, you could have an argument over whether that's good or not. I don't think there's any world in which viewership numbers of 400 or 500,000 is considered good. That's below a level where no matter how cheaply you're doing it, you're just not resonating with people. Any little old thing can get 400,000 or 500,000 viewers on a weekend afternoon sometimes. So those are numbers that should be pretty concerning in terms of or is anybody even noticing what we're doing type questions.
Are you talking network, cable, or just network?
Well, I think for any platform, I think that it's easier to get bigger numbers on a broadcast. I'm just saying, whether it's on ESPN2 or Fox broadcast, if you're getting under, say, 600 or 700,000 viewers, I think it becomes very difficult to see how that really is penciling out for anybody. Now, it's early. USFL is still just year 1, and the USFL is the very beginning of year 2. You can argue you got to give us time to step up, but on their face, those numbers are not the face of a property that's really landing with the public.
So you're saying this 235 on ESPN2 for the Orlando San Antonio game, that's on ESPN2, 235,000 viewers. That would be somewhat of a sign to you?
Yeah, look, that's one game. It's on ESPN2, which isn't as well distributed as ESPN. So I don't think that alone is concerning. But what's the season-long average, I think, for XFL? Like 600 or so?
Yeah, I have it here.
Yeah, I forget my numbers exactly, but the average is the average. So that means half their games are less than that. I think a world in which half of your games aren't even getting 600,000 measured viewers is a bit of a troubled world. And it's season 1. I'm not saying they're giving up, but That's not what you're looking for, I don't think. And USFL numbers are a bit higher, but again, I think you want to be at 1 million. I think in general terms here, that would be a point where I think it would be a lot easier for an outsider to say, okay, they got something here.
Yeah, it's 588, 250 US XFL 2023 season average. USFL obviously only has one weekend, 789 on that. So I mean, obviously it's always going to be higher on that, but yeah, 588 for the XFL through 9 weeks now.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't want to be. They might even call and object, but because it is first year, and that's certainly what their spin would be. Is like, hey, we're still getting our feet underneath us, but. I mean, you look at other things that's like regular season college basketball. Not that's fine, but they've got March Madness to bring you around. I mean, what's the big thing that these low numbers are building up to? Maybe the XFL championship game will do a good number. I'm not saying it won't, but I'm just saying I see these. I guess I'm bringing this up because I wrote about who won and who lost these numbers because it is interesting. It's the first time they've gone head to head, but I don't think either side of this should be feeling like they won, really. Exactly.
Are you surprised that XFL this year hasn't been able to capitalize more on the nostalgia, that it feels like it does to me feel like a new product again versus like this is the third iteration? It doesn't feel like they've been able to really carry over a lot of the momentum from 2020.
Yeah, I think that too much time elapsed. The news about how the 2020 XFL collapsed was not particularly positive. Yes, it was a pandemic, but also it was Vince going 12 rounds in court with Oliver Luck before finally settling. There was a lot of stories and bad blood about, teams and employees not being communicated well. I mean, nostalgia presupposes positive feelings about the history. With the notable exception of DC and St. Louis, I don't know how many people remember the 2020 XFL all that positively. And hey, I mean, 2 markets is great for the XFL. I mean, those are places where they really got something going in terms of a meaningful crowd base, people who seem to authentically care about those teams. That's great, but I think it falls off pretty quickly outside of those 2 places.
In terms of USFL here coming back and any novelty maybe of season 1, are you surprised that it debuted? They did the mental calisthenics of, okay, our season it's high, 4% higher if you base it off of all of last year, kind of the numbers. But are you surprised, or was it more of a holdover? I mean, I think it was like 50% decrease.
Yeah, well, it was 50% decrease year over year for the debut, but remember the debut last year was on NBC and Fox. This year is just on Fox, so that's bound to lower the numbers. Is it enough that would that actually translate to a true decline, a 50% decline? I'm not being very articulate, but what I mean is, if you had the exact same amount of sort of market interest in the game, but only put it on Fox instead of Fox and NBC, how much would the rating go down? I think it's probably close to 50%, but that's a little higher of a drop than I might have expected. So I don't know. It's hard to say. That number didn't surprise me because they weren't simulcasting it. I don't know. I in terms of like how much carryover there was from last spring, I think just in our modern world, last spring feels like a long time ago. And it's a market to market thing. If you were a Birmingham fan and saw that team almost, very, very dominant on the field, and you were able to see the games in person, that was something no other markets were able to do. You might have actually gotten a little bit excited about it. But I think the rest of the world is still kind of in a very much a wait and see for USFL.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because it felt like they used that last year to prop up. Like, we're going to simulcast it, the same game and kind of all that stuff. And now, again, only Reed here is that USFL haters pointing out the decline and all of that. But still, it is interesting that the propping up last year now has led to what perceived as a bigger drop this year.
Right. When, you never think about year 2 after year 1. But had they not simulcasted last year, it probably would have been, a flat, or maybe I don't know. I shouldn't speculate what it would be. But right, by trying to have such a big splash last year, they gave themselves only one way to go this year, right?
A couple of questions I'll let you get out. I know you're busy working here. Is Fox execs, are they doing high fives and laps in the boardroom here Monday morning or Tuesday when the ratings came out? Or how do you think that they obviously you're not in their mind, but what do you think they perceived it?
I mean, discerning what the networks really think about ratings is really hard because they spin any and all ratings. I mean, I ask Austin about that next time you ask him. It is legitimately hilarious the ways that they will find to put out a nice press release about even bad numbers. So, and even to get them to speak freely on background about what they really think of these numbers is hard. My best read of the Fox mindset off of USFL was that it was fine. I mean, the week one was fine. I don't think it's a grand slam. I think they're happy they beat XFL. They like that. There's, a low-level rivalry there. They try not to be too public about, but, I think they definitely are calling attention to each other's flaws from league to league in an understated way. So I think Fox is happy they won the head-to-head. The numbers are good enough they can put out a good press release. But whether do they really believe the positivity of the press release? Hard for me to say. And again, I think the vision for this would mean numbers more like 800, 900, and 1 million rather than 500, 600, and 700, that sort of thing. So,
does spring football here have a place?
I still don't know if we know that. I mean, I think we have a lot more data than we did a year ago about this because, as I said last year, and I've said many times in print, simply existing and continuing to put games on television is a big part of the battle here. It's a multi-year process. Nobody became a diehard Green Bay Packers fan in one day or even a year. That's the result of years and years and years of building bonds with your fans. I think that I know I'm not answering your question. I'm just trying to think this through. I mean,
Ben, you're doing great.
Forward momentum is good. The fact that USFL is playing more markets is good. The XFL, I mean, I watched the St. Louis game on Saturday, and just the energy in that building is really great TV. And that is just light years different from the hub model where most of the time the Birmingham Stadium was empty last year for USFL. So, I think the question from the league standpoint is, how do we make sure we keep our doors open just so we keep playing these games? It's about reps. It's about getting people comfortable with the idea of spring football. And I think to answer your question, I don't know if there's a place for it. It's very difficult to get people's attention. You're competing with nice spring days and baseball that suddenly seems much more watchable with the new rules changes. The Masters was pretty entertaining. There's just so many things. It's very tough to really find a product market fit on this. But I think that, every day that there's more XFL and USFL action on without them going out of business is a step in the right direction for them, because it is about just repeating and creating a habit in the customers' minds. And I think they're going in the right direction on that. And I think there is a way to do this, but it takes a lot of business discipline and some luck to have some things come together.
I have one more real question, then the joke one, and you're done. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Do you worry, XFL 2020, we have ESPN, ABC, we have everybody together right now. And obviously this feuding and the split where both USFL and XFL feels like you're existing kind of half of the former XFL 2020. Like, are they enough on their own? I mean, I know I don't want to talk merging or anything, but is there enough behind either of them on their own to really kind of knock it out of the park?
I think that is the $1 billion question. I think that is a question about talent. And I can talk marketing and ticket sales and the stadium deals and the venue agreements and the strategy all day long. I think that's a question for football experts. Have we reached the limit of the quarterbacks you want to watch on television? There's roughly 90 quarterbacks in the NFL. And then, 60, 90 if you get the emergency to the third stringers in. And then, so we got 2 more spring leagues now playing. I mean, how many of the quarterbacks are, consistently hit an open receiver? I don't think either the USFL or XFL is like unwatchable. I think it's a plausible product. I watch it and think, yeah, these guys clearly aren't, this clearly isn't Patrick Mahomes, but they're also not just skipping balls into the dirt on a wide open wide receiver, which is, better than the Big Ten can say sometimes. And people watch that. So I think can they both succeed is can two separate spring leagues get enough football players that are worth paying to watch? And I think the answer so far is yes. But, there's only so many people who are good at quarterback or, good at being an offensive lineman or being a wide receiver. And I think that's what we're going to have to see, is clearly, DC is a dominant team and XFL and Birmingham and the USFL. But what about the worst teams in the league? Are they worth watching? I don't know the answer to that yet.
Last one for me. If listener Seth and we have bottles of champagne chilling to pop when the Commanders are sold. When are we getting ready? When are we getting ready to pop those champagne bottles?
I think it's happening pretty soon, actually. Look, it's Dan Snyder. There's always a higher potential for drama or nonsense than with other people. But I've decided after being a real skeptic on this for a long time, just in the last week or so, that the motivations and the intentions all line up. The buyer, the seller, and the league all want this to happen. And I think when that happens, things in the NFL move very quickly. So, look, there's billable hours. Lawyers are not going to let this deal happen without making their own money on that. And it's a complicated deal. So I'm not saying that work isn't real. It's going to take a little bit of time to cross all the T's and dot the I's and to make sure everything is 100% kosher and get it approved by league owners. But they're all really excited to have this happen as soon as possible. So I would guess Josh Harris is going to be approved as the new control owner of the Commanders, easily by the start of NFL training camp.
That's good. That's that. Well, Ben, it's good to catch up with you. I know you're busy with everything, so thank you so much for your time. Our listeners appreciate it.
Happy to do it when I can. Thanks for having me.
Well, excited today. We have Andrew Bucholtz back on Awful Announcing. Talked with Andrew a few weeks ago, getting his take on the XFL ratings. Now we have USFL Week 1, all the head-to-heads, everything else. Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks very much for having me.
It's good. So you have your article here. We'll go through it over at Awful Announcing. But general thoughts, what did you make? We had the big, final head-to-head two football leagues here, Aaron.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway for me is that both of these leagues playing at the same time, even if you combine their numbers, they're not as good as some of what we've seen in the past, whether that's for the XFL in 2020 or for the USFL last year. And I think that does maybe add to some of the concerns people had about what would it be like with these two leagues playing at the same time.
Do you attribute that to a busier, sports marketplace, viewer fatigue? What do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there are a lot of factors there. Both of those things are probably part of it. There is good sports competition going on, but that's been the case in the past as well, particularly with the USFL and with their April on schedule. They're always going against the NHL and the NBA playoffs. So I think there's a bit of viewer fatigue, possibly. Alternative football is much less of a weird and out there concept now than it was, say, in 2019 when we had the AAF or in 2020 when we first had the XFL. This is a thing that's been sort of going on for a few years. A lot of the stories about these various leagues have not been great, in particular with regards to off-the-field stuff. And that's what makes it remarkable that the USFL is even going to a second consecutive season, which no major outdoor league had done since the original USFL. So, I think there's a little bit, maybe the novelty's wearing off a little bit, but it's also maybe just these leagues are sort of, both of them are taking some of that audience and some of that attention, and that means there's less for each of them, perhaps.
Well, I was surprised. So we were doing our live stream on Tuesday when the ratings came out, and I was surprised that Fox came out and said basically that there was a 4% increase season 1 to season 2, which mental gymnastics was if you average the 10 weeks of USFL season 1, which, went down as any league does, and then compare that against week 2 or, season 2, week 1, there was a 4% increase because they averaged 789,500 viewers. Here I have your article. That to me speaks of, we're really trying to do some mental calisthenics here to kind of show an increase. What did you make of that?
Well, I mean, I don't think that's unusual, really. Like, if you look at ratings releases from network PR departments, they're always looking to spotlight some good thing, and they'll make a wide variety of comparisons to try and ensure that there is some good thing there to be spotlighted. But I think you hit on the absolutely key part of that, which is that yeah, this number looks higher, but that is versus the whole season average versus week one last year, week one last year was not as good as week one this year. I mean, sorry, the other way around. Week
Correct,
one last year was better, and this is not.
Yeah, because I think it was the average. What was it? 3.2 whatever million this year, and it was more like 6 million the previous year. Even if you factor in that the Monday night rescheduled game because of like rain and wind delays and all that. Even if you just took the 3, it's down substantially, about 50%.
Yeah, if you average the 3 from last year, not that rescheduled one, it was about 2 million in average audience, not peak audience. And then so that's a long way from the 789,000 this year. And I mean, yeah, like of course, with all of these fades, even with a raw decrease, that doesn't mean this is necessarily a bad thing, a terrible thing for these leagues or for these networks. Would they love to have the heights? Absolutely. But like there's still some level where this is worth it for everyone involved.
Were you surprised in being on the 3 network windows and then the FS1 for the USFL games, not hitting a million in any of those? I was really surprised the NBC game did as well as it did. It was like 984. But thoughts on we have 3 network clearances and none of them cracking a million.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. And if you had brought that up a few years ago, people would have been, why in the world are you showing this on network TV? But we're in an environment where all sorts of TV is taking hits compared to what it used to be. Numbers that used to be fatal for network TV are no longer. We're seeing more and more of an emphasis on putting sports on network TV with increased cord cutting. And I think that's a huge part of the USFL to XFL comparison here, is that 3 of the XFL games this weekend were on cable and 3 of the USFL were on network.
Yeah, because I think it was 700,000 average versus. I mean, obviously the USFL is going to draw more on that. Did you read any more or less into that maybe XFL here in week 9 should pull more? Or is it just those clearances are always going to hold it down?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bigger thing is where it's televised, and like I think rather than week 1 versus week 9, I think a network slot is generally going to win out over a cable one. And you saw that with the one XFL that was on broadcast, Vegas Houston on ABC on Saturday, that got 878,000. So that's pretty close to it's above the 2 Fox ones from the USFL, below the NBC one. So I mean, there isn't a huge divide between any of those. Where the drop really is when you get to those ESPN games on the XFL, and really when you get to the ESPN2 one. And to me, the ESPN2 thing is interesting because I think a lot of people talk about this in the wrong way. They say, oh, less people have access to it because it's ESPN2. That's not really true. All the corporate reports indicate that ESPN2 is in pretty much the exact same numbers of homes as ESPN because they negotiate all of those Disney networks together. But the thing is, people turn on ESPN by default and will watch whatever is there. And that's especially true for bars, restaurants, gyms, and so on. Nobody turns on ESPN2 unless they're looking for a thing. And I think that's what really is indicative about this alternative football in general here, of if it's somewhere where people aren't necessarily looking for it, where people aren't necessarily going there, then you wind up with that 235,000 on ESPN2 Saturday night. But if it's in some place like ESPN, you're much more likely to get 500, 600,000.
Yeah, because I'm looking on here that to me 2:35, 7 p.m. Saturday night. That's a slightly alarming. I mean, do we know competition at that time? I mean, obviously the NBA stuff's heating up and everything else, but that to me seems a little bit low.
Yeah, and I mean, But it's a question of relative to what else, right? Like, whereas 235 for ESPN2 is a way better number than 235 for ESPN would be. And so it comes down to what the other network is showing, what they need it for. And even like the overflow channels of ESPN2 and FS1 and whatever, they can be fine. You just have to have you have to understand that it's going to get way lower of an audience.
Going USFL season 1 to 2, did you ever expect there to be an increase, or is it just you're always going to have more novelty, more interest, more everything year one, and then maybe we build over 5 years? But like, did you ever expect 2 to top 1?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think some people at Fox and USFL headquarters would have expected year 2 to possibly top year 1 with we've established this, we've built this brand, we're coming back with it. I think from my perspective, and this is not just with hindsight, but I think it's hard to imagine it being better when it is up head-to-head against another league. I think like the overlap in audience for these leagues is significant. I think it's football fans, but then beyond it, it's fans who are willing to look at football beyond the NFL. And there's one very wide group of that they'll check in occasionally just based on novelty, and that really falls off when you go into a second year or third year or whatever. There's another group that's more committed to it, more interested in the actual product, and I think that's what you're trying to build over time, and that's what both of these leagues are trying to go for with let's do some more games in markets, let's play in more cities, let's set up for the long run. I don't think that group is anywhere near what the novelty group was, and I think the novelty group has fallen off because it's not as much of a novelty anymore.
Was curious to me, and obviously we'll have to have you back on here in a couple of weeks, but when XFL goes away, is there going to be a 35% increase in all the USFL ratings, right? Like, are people just, I can't sit and watch 8 football games in the weekend, or especially if the 2 are overlapping or whatever. We don't know that yet. But what is your instincts, or what thoughts do you have on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll absolutely get some boost. I think you'll get some boost from lessened competition and from people who. And I think an interesting thing is with both of these leagues still being quite new. There's probably some people who are hardcore fans of one team or one league and so on, but there's a lot of people who are just here for alternative football. And so I think you will get a bunch of them transitioning over from the XFL to the USFL once that XFL season wraps up. The thing is, though, you're not going to get all of them. So I don't think that this becomes just let's add the USFL audience and the XFL audience from this week. I don't think that's what you're going to get in the first week of no more XFL. I think what you're more likely to get, and of course this depends on network placement, it depends on what other sports are going on and so on. But I think what you're more likely to get is maybe 30 to 50% of those people who would have been watching the other league, they're maybe coming over and watching a game here.
It's hard. I know that both leagues are strategically positioned, right? XFL wants to go right after the Super Bowl, and USFL, and we got to get done because we got to get players into OTAs. But if there was a 2-3 week window where they could separate it and not that, I don't know. I mean, is the overlap worth it, or do you just ride it out for those 3 or 4 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing with all these leagues is that there's a lot of considerations beyond them and beyond what's best for their TV. And I think you hit on some of it, particularly with the USFL focus on getting done in time for people to go to OTAs. And for both of these leagues, they're really trying to build their credibility by getting guys to go from there onto the NFL. They want nothing to do with any level of actual NFL overlap, right? So that marks off a large amount of the calendar year that you just can't use. So I don't know that there's a better way to do this. I think that if both of these leagues are going to keep going, they're probably going to keep going with similar schedules to what they're doing right now, and they'll just take the overlap and take the audience cannibalization.
When you saw the ratings come out this week, what was your kind of initial gut reaction?
I mean, I think the first initial thing was it was sort of interesting that nothing cracked 1 million, and because I mean that's often been sort of a mark. That's been what people have been looking for, and that didn't happen at all here. I think that's particularly disappointing for the USFL, perhaps, because this was their big launch. This was their week one. They're hoping to, and it, like we were talking about, it really was way below what week one was last year. It's good in comparison to their overall audience last year, but it's way below what their launch was last year. For the XFL, I think this is like it's just continuing the trend of a bit of a decline week by week by week. It's still probably sort of fine, especially when you consider that two of those are ESPN, one's ESPN two, but like they're not. And it's interesting because if you look at the comments from their executives that I wrote up last week, they were like, "Oh, this is going to get so much better in the back half of the schedule. We don't have the March Madness competition anymore. We've got these better network placements. We're not on FX anymore." Which, like, yes, absolutely true. All of that is valid, but it hasn't really worked out the way they had hoped.
I guess expand on that more, because I think it goes maybe along with what you have thought. And when you came on the show before, you talked about how you think sometimes network execs believe that there's a higher ceiling here than maybe there is, right, that exists in the viewership level. But expand on their plan here for the second half and maybe how it hasn't worked out or what you've noticed with the trends.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is based on an article I wrote on March 27th, and that had Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Danny Garcia talking with Tom Schad of USA Today about their ratings so far and where they were hoping to go. And in particular, they were talking about, we understood the challenge. Garcia said, we understood the challenges that would happen all the way up through week 5. And as we get into the week 6 and the latter half, we knew where it would open up. So we're really pleased with the execution. And that's all fair. Like, they're right. They got a bunch of games on FX. The FX game, and like we talk about the ESPN to ESPN2. Well, FX is way worse because, and it's fine in distribution, but no one is going there looking for sports content. So you have that, and whenever you wind up with something like that, you are limiting yourself much more to the hardcore fan who looks up where a game is broadcast, is going to go seek it out, is going to find the channel listing. Well, we've seen that with all sorts of other things. I mean, that's the long-running thing with March Madness and True TV Awareness Month. Of tons of people have True TV, but they can't find it. So that's the same with FX. It's the same to a lesser degree with ESPN2. The XFL was right to have a little optimism of, okay, we're getting some better network assignments in the second half. We're getting away from all these FX games. But I think they were maybe over-optimistic in how much that would boost them, especially with the USFL coming back too. And the thing that I brought up the last time we talked here, but is always worth remembering with these leagues, is that Fox has strong incentive to make the USFL work because they own the league. NBC's working with them. It's working fine for NBC. Great. ESPN is just the broadcaster for the XFL. So the XFL really has a tougher road to climb in making sure their product continues to work for a broadcaster that doesn't own them.
What do you make of and I have one more question here before I let you get out of here. What do you make of the NBC always seeming to track higher than Fox? Mm-hmm. Is NBC just a more popular station than Fox? Is it that they maybe have less competition that day? Like, it's just, Michigan always ranks well, but it does seem like NBC always, their viewership last year was significantly higher than the average Fox viewership over the course of the season. Yeah,
it's an interesting point. I think some of what's going on there is that the overall NBC broadcast weekend schedule is probably stronger than the overall Fox weekend broadcast schedule, and that's something to do with sports. Not always. Fox is decent at the moment with some MLB stuff and so on, but just in general, NBC has sort of put more programming effort into weekends. There have been more big national themes carried on NBC, whereas Fox's national strategy outside of primetime has often been a little hit or miss. So there may be less people just naturally turning on Fox. There may be less people expecting sports there at those given times. I don't know for sure. I don't know that that's exactly how it works, but it would make some sense to me that there is a larger subset that defaults to network NBC than network Fox.
My last question, and I know we lived through all this and the minutiae of everything. I wonder what the non-zero number of people that couldn't even differentiate, right? Like, oh, it's football. They're on the field. I couldn't even tell you that one is USFL or XFL or what, the Rock who, I mean, how, and we don't know this, but I mean, the savviness of the viewer, right, to even differentiate if we're switching between games, like you might just think this is all kind of spring football going on.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a group in that category. I think that's especially the real casual fans I was talking about, and I think that's especially true for a lot of the out-of-home viewing of, like, if it's on in a restaurant or a bar or whatever, a lot of the people are going to be, football, rather than necessarily knowing the difference between the leagues and who's involved in which. And I think that is a significant portion of the case for both of these leagues going forward as a viable product is, hey, we're giving you a football game that you can throw on your bar or restaurant TVs in the middle of winter/spring. So that is an audience that both of these leagues need, and it's one that they both have to continue to court. But it's now interesting that they're maybe taking a little bit of that audience away from each other.
Exactly. No, I think it's fascinating, at least right now. And like I said, we'll see the increase. I'm sure there'll be an increase when the XFL ends, but whether that, does that ramp up or ramp down? Be curious. Andrew, any other thoughts before I let you go? Andrew Bucholtz with Awful Announcing. I appreciate it.
No, thanks a lot for having me. I think just the last thing is that this is a very interesting thing to watch and follow, and especially with both of these leagues publicly saying they want to keep going. They want to keep doing this for years to come. I think from my perspective, the real interesting thing is going to be to track what level of ratings, what level of ticket sales, what level of everything do they need for that, and how long is it viable for them both to keep going.
Well, Andrew, I appreciate it. I will try to get you back on here after the XFL championship game. I think that will be an interesting week to monitor. So I really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited today. We have long-awaited Cole Cubelic joining us, ESPN sidelines, seeing him working the sidelines all season for the XFL. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, man. Appreciate you having me. We've been trying to connect for a couple of weeks here, so I'm glad we got it worked out.
It's okay. You guys are busy. I appreciate balancing all the other ESPN stuff. How's your life right now? How are you feeling approaching XFL Week 10?
Tired. I'm used to going through my wife and I went to dinner last night. We were talking about it, go through fall, and then we've got spring to kind of be a married couple again, and then get through summer with the kids, and then we start up. But it's been a lot of fun. It really has. I did it in 20 and did not know how much I would love it and just love being a part of it. And it's been even better this time around. DJ and Danny and Redbird Capital, the folks behind it have been amazing. They're so appreciative of us and been communicating with us on a regular basis. And the coaches have been very welcoming. I think the players have a pretty good idea of what we're trying to accomplish on the sideline, what we're trying to talk to them. And I think the ball's been pretty good. I mean, most of our games have been very competitive. I don't think we've had a game that was completely out of reach going into the fourth quarter. And that always makes it more compelling and more fun. So I've met some great people, had competitive football games. It's live tackle football. I'm always going to be a fan of that. And I'm a fan of this league. I think it's got long-term sustainability. It's been a lot of fun. But make no mistake, here's the thing. The Sunday games really kick my ass because I do a morning radio show with McElroy, who's on my XFL crew. And so we had one cancellation. St. Louis, we got canceled, had to spend the night. We had the 8 o'clock kick in Houston, and then I had 2 other delays on Sunday nights. So, getting home at 1:30 or midnight and like that's just brutal. Or flying out right after doing the show from the hotel the next morning. That's been the toughest part, but it's absolutely worth it because I love being a part of it.
Talking about, I think week 10 here, we cover the USFL and everything else. You could have a very dud week 10 coming in, right? Where there's not a lot of stakes in an 8-team league, but really all the games still have meaning this weekend. Obviously, we'll be at the Dragons game with the Vipers, but all of these in DC, Brahma's kind of trying to play spoiler there. What do you make of just kind of the competitiveness and the parity across everything?
I think all but maybe one or two games this year have had some sort of playoff implications, and that's throughout the course of the entire season, because even Orlando wasn't eliminated like 2 weeks ago. So they were still in the hunt longer than you would expect if you look at their record, and that's kind of the same deal with San Antonio. I'll be on DC at San Antonio this weekend. Brahmas can still play their way into the playoffs. They need some things to happen, of course, but it's possible, it's feasible, and you're looking for other teams to get in. I mean, St. Louis and Seattle, obviously, both have an opportunity to get in. That's going to be exciting, and two of the best venues for XFL games. Those crowds have been phenomenal. We know about what DC has been as well. Fantastic there. I've had a couple of games in the Alamo Dome. That's been fun. The Roughnecks crowds have been showing up in Houston, but I don't think anybody would debate you that St. Louis and those Battlehawk fans have been unbelievable, and obviously Seattle as well. So the fact that we get to go into this final weekend, yes, 2 playoff teams set, but 2 more still having work to do to get in, it just makes it that much more compelling in the final weekend.
What surprised you the most in a good way or bad way kind of going through the season?
I think biggest surprise to me has probably been the coaching changes and how teams have adapted to that. Like you saw Las Vegas, they fired their offensive coordinator. Hines Ward makes a move at offensive coordinator. You're just kind of like, hold on, you're 3 weeks into this. These guys haven't been around each other very long. You're not going to have a ton of continuity anyway. How is that going to go over? And I actually feel like it when Jimmy Johnson, I had the game where he came in and became the OC against Arlington. It was working early on. And then all of a sudden you lose Reed Sinnett, and you kind of got to go back to Jack Cohn, and then it's become Cohn, Puma, Pass. If it wasn't for the quarterback juggling, I actually think that move may have been really beneficial for San Antonio long term. Vegas has been a little bit more of a roller coaster offensively, but I think they now have their guy quarterback. So you see them start to sort of climb here late in the season. Rod's got the kids still playing hard. That defense is fun to watch. They just, they've turned it over, and they've made some silly mistakes over the course of the season. So I didn't anticipate coaching. It's not a long season to begin with, and these guys hadn't really been around each other very long, smaller rosters. So I don't know if I anticipated that much turnover at the coaching spots, especially coordinator spots. And it's been weird to see, but it's been pretty cool to see how the teams have also managed it.
Yeah, what do you make of Coach Woodson? I mean, very emotionally driven. I kind of see some sideline stuff, and credit to him. I think to keep the players playing hard here, even into Week 10. But he's very vocally upset sometimes about lots of things. It seems
a lot of times. Now, I have been opposite him twice. We had Vegas in the first game against Arlington, and we had him last week against Houston. And I've been on calls with him. I've talked to him for a while before the game. I think that's just the competitor that comes out, and whether it's going after the officials on a call, whether it's you've heard him say some things to some of the players and just the intensity level that he wants them to stay at. But I would just say specifically on defense, look at how he's had those guys continue to play, and there have not been many moments that I've watched them on film or live in a game where I felt like anybody's been checked out or doesn't feel like they still have a lot to play for. So. And it's his first time doing this, just kind of like Hines Ward and a couple of these guys. They don't have a ton of experience of how things happen in game, how to manage your emotions in game, who to go talk to on the sideline. So they're learning at the same time. But he's been a joy to be around. Now, listen, I also grew up a Steelers fan, so being in the league with Hines Ward and Rod Woodson has been pretty cool for me.
In terms of Coach Ward, and obviously you'll be at the game this weekend. You talk the quarterback thing. There's got to be something else going on there. I mean, we saw Kurt Benkert come in and get injured. I mean, they haven't been able to keep anyone healthy. Is it just do you attribute that to bad luck, or what is San Antonio's woes?
Yeah, I don't know if you would put it on an individual, but I mean, last week you lose maybe your leader on defense and Jack Kerner at safety, or 2 weeks ago you lose Jack Kerner at safety. We were on that game. And you're just kind of like, hold on, like who else can you even afford to lose? Mike and Delonte Scott have kind of been in and out of the lineup. They've been nicked up at times. I think they've played 15 different offensive line combinations. They've lost multiple offensive linemen. They've had to bring more in. You lose Jaquez Patrick, who was your kind of go-to feature tailback, even though, Patrick's filled in, but you lose Balaj earlier, who he was kind of your go-to guy, the guy you started it off with. They had a receiver in Calvin Turner. They were excited to get back and see what he could do. And then they lose. He doesn't really make it all the way back in. So they just haven't been able to have their full allotment of talent. And I think some of the guys that Hines was depending on to be able to carry big loads in this season, they've been banged up or they've been in and out of the lineup. And when you play 4 or 5 different quarterbacks over the course of a year, you're going to struggle offensively. And if the reason that those quarterbacks are not staying in the game is because of your inability to block people a lot of time, you're really going to have some trouble. So they're thin at tailback. They're thin on the offensive line. They've rotated quarterbacks. Now they're thin on the back end of the defense. It's been wild to watch. He has been incredible about it because we've had San Antonio. I think this will be our 6th time we've had San Antonio this year. And he has stayed positive. He's had answers for everything. Like I said, he made an offensive coordinator switch on his own. And Jamie stayed on staff and continued to coach on the staff as well when he was demoted. So he's kept the continuity about as strong as you could anticipate. And I can tell you that record, not where you would want it. And like you said, they've suffered because of some of those injuries, but still being competitive and still fought their rear ends off in games and still have a chance to get into the playoffs this weekend.
Yeah, because we get a lot. There's a lot of chatter online, and we want to bring in new, fresh, new coaches and kind of give them an opportunity here. But then you do see Heinz Ward and like Terrell Buckley. People are kind of Rob Woodson are struggling, and I just don't know if it's circumstance or if there's things that they could have done differently. Because obviously, it's a learning process for everybody, but you just wonder if it's what came first in that scenario.
Well, I think they're very different examples. Like with Heinz, I really do believe if that's a healthy football team for the most part, we're not talking about them being sub 500 right now. When you look at TJ Vasher at wide receiver, Alizé Mack at tight end, whether it was Patrick or Balazs at tailback, like they had things going at different points in time. Like the pass rush has been incredible. I mean, Mike and Delonte Scott can get after you. Those dudes are fun to watch. I think Drew Beasley's been one of my bigger surprises in the XFL. I didn't know a ton about him, and then I put the film on him with San Antonio early on. He's playing down inside, he's out wide on the edge, but he's finding ways to get to the quarterback. And then of course, Jim Herman's going to bring pressure, so they're going to get after your ass as well on that side of the ball. So I just think that's more of a, they brought in Cam Kelly, I think after week 3. And Heinz was like, we can build our defense around this guy. Like, that's how important he became, but he wasn't even on the roster in camp. So, and then I think when you go to Las Vegas last week, Rod told us, he said, listen, we're a totally different team than week 1 when you saw us last. Obviously a different quarterback, but we've manipulated our offense a little bit. Defensively, listen, I love that San Antonio defense, but good Lord, Las Vegas gets after you. I mean, you talk about playing downhill. And it's not 1 or 2. Like, Pete has had the best year maybe anybody in the XFL on that side of the ball. Vic Beasley can still get to the quarterback. Their safeties come flying down. I mean, Vegas has just been awesome to watch on defense. So I do think that the injuries have played into some of it. I think Orlando kind of had some quarterback issues from the get-go. Like, you were having trouble protecting. And the weird thing about Orlando was, Seth, is because we had them, I think, week 2 or 3, and I'm watching them, and I'm like, hold on a minute. They're running the ball. Like, when they would actually hand the ball off, their offensive line could get movement at the point of attack. They had good backs that hit the hole hard. But it's just there was a lot of that RPO, pull the ball. Listen, I talked to we were talking to Houston last week and talking to AJ, and he's like, man, I'm done with RPOs. He's like, there is no run pass option. He's like, it's run pass throw. That's what it is. He goes, it's not RPO, it's run pass throw. And he's right. Most quarterbacks, if you tell a quarterback you can hand it or throw it, they're going to throw it. So I think Orlando had a little bit of an identity issue on offense early on. And if they would have figured out some of the things that they have throughout the season, if they would have known that about themselves early, they may have been a little bit of a different team. And listen, you got a quarterback on their team that people were saying needed to be fired and kicked off the team because he was alleged to do some things he never did. And now he's having success, but they haven't been able to protect very well. And I think that's a big reason that they just couldn't find their way into the win column very much.
In terms of DC here, not leaps and bounds above. I mean, we saw Seattle keep it close, but obviously the best team in the league right now. What do you attribute that success to for them?
Very stout defensively as well. Maybe not as aggressive as far as attacking like a San Antonio is or like a Las Vegas is, but they don't really have to be. I think they've been pretty smart with showing some different things up front, some simulated pressures, getting in and out of it. They don't dedicate a lot of their bodies to the back end of the defense because they understand that teams have had trouble sitting in the pocket and throwing the football. So what's the intelligent thing to do? play 7 or 8 in the box. And then you take away the short throws, you take away a lot of the run game, and you can apply pressure when you need to. And then just that 2-quarterback system has really worked out well. I mean, you've got Jordan Ta'amu, a guy who understands the league. He was in it before in St. Louis and was having a hell of a year. And then you can bring De'Aaron King in for a little bit of a change-up, who I don't really even think – I think that's it's kind of a sidebar story of this league are other quarterbacks that are sort of getting opportunities that I could see as future XFL starters. Like when I put the tape on of Nick Tiano the other day, he threw some dimes in that. Like he wasn't just running the ball and being a power runner. Like he had some great throws. And De'Aaron King doesn't need, in my opinion, doesn't just have to be a change-up guy. Like he could be a full-time quarterback in this league. So I think we may have seen bits and pieces of some quarterbacks that are going to end up being starters in this league down the road. But DC, the thing that sticks out for me, and it's a little bit similar sort of to St. Louis, is just balance. They have the ability to run the ball. Now, DC does it in a little bit of a different way. It's not as traditional with Brian Hill like St. Louis does, but they have the run game. They have different option plays that they can utilize to go run the football. They play good defense. They've got some guys that can help them on the perimeter. So they're just balanced. Their offensive line is probably the best in the league, and that helps a lot with what you're trying to do on that side of the ball.
Do you give San Antonio any chance this weekend against DC?
The one reason that I would is I'm uncertain how DC is going to manage things because you're in and you have home field. So, and listen, these rosters aren't big enough to sit, 5 or 6 different guys, but does it change how they call the game? Are they less aggressive defensively? Is it just kind of a ground and pound plan on offense, trying to run the clock, get out of there, keep guys healthy? I don't know how it's going to be managed. That would be one reason that I would. And like I said before, Hines has done a great job of just staying positive. He's found different ways to get his guys motivated. And as I pointed out, they have Delonte Scott who can take over a game. I think TJ Vasher's a guy that any one-on-one ball he's got a chance to go get. You still have Jacques Patrick, a tailback, who's been pretty good for him this year. So they have individuals that can give you explosive plays on both sides of the ball. Even though they've lost some and a lot of them are out, they still have guys that can make plays that are talented. So I don't know if I would completely count them out of this game.
Last question for you. I'm watching the clock here. We get done with this season. What's your advice moving into season 2? What would you like to see or what would you hope to see?
Well, I think for the league, it's maybe add a roster spot or 2 just because injuries have affected the teams and some of the games so much. But part of that, too, is, there's only so much talent to go around. So are you going to add spots to bring guys in that may not contribute if you didn't have injury concerns? The one thing that I thought was greatly beneficial the last time around that we don't have this time around was the extra team. I can't remember if it was like Team 9, Team 10, whatever they called it. And you had guys that went and they practiced every day on a team. So they went through individual with their position groups, and then they went and ran team drills against one another. They ran plays, through routes. Pass protected. Then those guys are ready when you lose 2 offensive linemen in a game or you lose 2 running backs over 2 weeks. Like, this kid's been playing. He's ready to step in right now. And the league has been monitoring him. He can share the facilities and work out. Other than that, I think it's been fantastic. I mean, what they allow us to do from a broadcast perspective has been amazing. The access that we get, I absolutely love it. The promotion has been off the charts. The involvement with the league between us and the teams and the players has been fantastic. So that would be one thing that I would kind of think of that I think could be great because the rules have been awesome. Like, I don't know how this kickoff rule is not implemented at every level of football. I really don't. It makes too much sense. And I think the only reason it hasn't been is people don't want to do something. They don't want to make that big of a change when it's not their idea. Having that one challenge. Apparently Belichick's been after that for years in the NFL. That has been incredible because you have immediate drama of, is the coach going to use it? Should he use it? And, that has been just a really fun talking point. And then listening to Dean come in and be able to describe things. We don't get that at a lot of other levels. It's been really cool to see. But I think maybe having that extra team there practicing every day, ready to play football instead of, working at UPS or working at a grocery store, that could maybe be beneficial year 2.
All right, cool. Well, you need to go hop on your coach's call. I appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to hopefully having you get on in the future. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm on playoff game and championship game, so we're still living the X here for a couple more weeks.
Sounds good. Thanks. Well, I'm excited here. We've been talking, Paul Reeths here, USFL historian with OurSports Central, has been, we've been talking USFL for a better part of 2 years now. Now we're back, season 2, XFL competing. It was kind of, I didn't watch all 8 football games, but I watched probably more than my wife would have preferred me to do. But how are you doing, Paul? And what do you make of everything so far?
I'm well. Thank you for having me on, Reed. Whirlwind weekend, 8 games, the most that we've seen in spring football since 1984. I tried to catch a little piece at least of each game, but it was difficult, kind of flipping back and forth, but fun. I mean, what a blast. Who ever thought that we'd be in this position? We're just enjoying this plethora of riches in spring football this weekend.
What did you make of the USFL's return? Anything that surprised you in how they did or didn't do? I notice now, like, we have a lot more on Twitter. We're showing like Herschel Walker highlights and things like that. Anything you're noticing?
Absolutely, the tie-in to the past USFL was a big emphasis. The kind of the handcuffs were off as far as mentioning the original league. You saw some video highlights, plenty of mentions of the old league. So that was one thing that did stand out in contrast to last year when we don't know officially that there was anything said, don't mention the old USFL, but there was obviously something said, don't mention the old USFL. So now that they've reached an agreement with the old USFL, they're now free to mention it and try to tie in records and all of those things.
Does that make you feel better or worse and different about kind of the new regime in here?
I'm glad that they reached an agreement. I'm glad that there's no longer any contention between the old guard and the new. And I'm always happy to see mentions of, a league that I have a tremendous amount of fondness for from the 1980s. So those things are all good.
In terms of the actual, I love our ESPN people with XFL. We just had Cole Cubelic on, and I love all of that. I do think Fox brings a certain familiarity, or, I called it on our live stream this week. It's like you're kind of putting on an old pair of jeans. You kind of know exactly what this is going to look and feel like if you watch NFL on Fox. What did you make of broadcast and them returning with the USFL?
Fox always does such a solid job with its coverage, and you're right. It does seem very familiar. You hear the music and you're thinking NFL football right away, and your mind is kind of in the game. And some of the innovations that they brought last year, they've brought back, such as the helmet cam and the drone cam. Some of those things come with some minuses too, such as the noise from the drone cam. I think that they're doing a better job of using some of those elements now rather than, hey, let's look at this from the helmet cam. It's something that we show going into the break, just a unique angle on it. So there are some things that are very familiar with the Fox broadcast that, super solid.
The Sunday games, the Memphis Birmingham obviously kind of had the same hub issues. Were you impressed, not impressed with the attendance we had in Memphis and Birmingham?
So both games on Saturday, where you had the home teams playing in Memphis and Birmingham, looks like they drew about 15 grand each, somewhere in that range. I know some people might quibble with the figure, but roughly in there. And those games look good. I mean, to me, Fox has not put much of an emphasis on revenue from in-stadium attendance. Obviously, with $10 tickets and all kinds of different deals, it looks like there were plenty of tickets available in Memphis for anybody who wanted to go. The people are props. They're props for the TV broadcast. And it works. That's fine. As long as you can continue to show crowds in the background, it really does change how that game looks on television. So all of that is good. You noticed on the Sunday games, one of the funnier moments I thought was when Pittsburgh scored on a fumble return. They're right there at the end zone. The guy goes to the back of the end zone where there were people seated. And it seemed like he wanted to give high fives, and a bunch of guys in hoodies just stood there and stared at him. It was kind of a funny moment. They didn't have any skin in the game, so it's a much different feel, even with some people in attendance.
Well, it's hard, and obviously certain XFL markets, obviously DC and the sellout I thought was tremendous. I mean, really contrasting, right? That Sunday game of, I don't care if it's 8,000, 12,000, 30,000, having a sellout just environment in whatever that venue size. But yeah, you cut to some of the, like even like Arlington, where they haven't always had the most amount. I still feel like the people there are invested, right? There's a balancing of we want people, but we also want people that really care about it.
Right. Even in Vegas, I mean, you have the smallest crowds in the league, 6,000, 7,000, but they're Vipers people. And so it gives the camera something to focus on. It gives a little bit more life to the ball game, rather than 200 or 300 who are just there for the afternoon. So yeah, it makes a difference. Now, having said that, I like to contrast USFL year to date. We had 3 games last year in front of, almost nobody. This year it's 2 games. So they've made strides there. Doing a better job. I think it'll be interesting to see what they do in Canton, but I think we'll see a little bit more life in Detroit as well. And then you have Birmingham and Memphis.
Well, that's the thing. I think Detroit, it's supposed to look really good. I mean, we had Tony Scott on, not the promoter of AEW, we had Tony Scott on, the writer for, I think it was the Detroit Press or whatever, talking about, there is an energy there and with all the stadium stuff. Yeah, Canton, I don't know if you get, I don't know. It'll be very interesting this week, and I think that could be a very dead market.
It could be, we could be seeing that same issue. I think the attendance will be better than the neutral site games in Birmingham and Memphis. And I think it'll look better because that stadium is smaller. But, who has skin in the game? Will there be energy with that attendance? It'll look better to a degree no matter what. But, yeah, it will be interesting, and especially as the season wears on. I think there'll be some curiosity initially. But then as the season wears on, what do those Canton games look like?
Well, that's the thing is, yeah, it's one thing that we're driving in or, we're coming in, from Pittsburgh or whatever for a weekend to do the open. I'm not doing this every weekend, even with the XFL here. I mean, I did the kickoff, but it's really hard for me to be like, yeah, let me go fly to St. Louis to go see the Dragons game there, whatever. It's just like, and I've had people, well, why aren't you going? I'm like, because people have stuff to do. I mean, I don't just have a weekend to go, I would love to travel and we have certain XFL super fans that do travel around, but it is hard to kind of expect that of people every weekend.
Yeah. And so most of the people, I imagine, are going to be fairly local. And you might have some people making treks from nearby metro areas, including Pittsburgh, that help out. But I think you're going to count on most of the attendance being local.
Quality of play for the USFL. Obviously, we're week 9 of the XFL, so that's not a fair comparison. But what did you make of the quality of the 4 USFL games?
Again, I'd like to do that year-to-date comparison. When we looked at the USFL week 1 of last year, it was pretty rough. It was pretty rough offensively. Now, contrast that with what we saw this past weekend. We had a couple of teams that were really rough offensively, Houston and Pittsburgh. But we had a couple that really kind of stood out. We had Philadelphia and Michigan both doing a very solid job offensively, and Memphis too. So year to date, I think we've seen that progress. We're likely to see some struggles these first few weeks. I don't think that's going to last as long in the USFL as it did last season, where some of the teams never really gelled, and a lot of the other ones that took it after mid-season. I think we're seeing that kind of happen a little bit faster because of the continuity that we have with, Love and Cookus, for instance, were in the league last year, and that helps. We also see a little bit of continuity here and there on offensive lines. That helps immensely. So I think that year to date, we're way ahead of where we were last year.
Because it is hard, because the announcers, I think they're talking, the Gamblers defense last year, and then this year, you're like, guys are leaving and trading and, not coming back. But there is still, I think, a core. It's a tough balance, right? Like, is there really enough to analyze on that? But you do feel like there's enough continuity in a lot of these league teams to be able to quantify that?
I think that there is some continuity, and even if you have a center guard combination that now is familiar with each other and knows, okay, if situationally they know what the other guy's going to do, that makes a huge difference. So instead of allowing a 15-yard sack, they're picking up that blitzer. So, I mean, those are some subtle things that you don't necessarily notice, but where that continuity does come into play.
We've done in our couple other interviews this show a big kind of deep dive on the ratings, but were you surprised that the USFL didn't hit 1 million on any of the network broadcasts?
I was a little surprised, to be honest. I thought even with the competition that we'd be looking somewhere around 1.2, 1.5 maybe. So there's just no precedent to what we saw this last week with competing leagues. So it could very well be that the XFL, kept those numbers down. And so the USFL has another, week and a half before those numbers come back up, where they retake maybe some of those XFL viewers.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the great mystery here, that middle of May when the XFL is done, if we get a sudden surge or not. I'll be curious here, people. Are you satiated? Are you moving on? Are we going on road trips? Or are we, I don't know. I know there's a non-zero number of people that are only going to watch the XFL or the USFL. I know there's obviously quite an overlap, but I am curious about that.
And I think the most helpful thing is that we saw so much spring football spread across multiple networks and multiple platforms. We're the core, we're the core who follows these leagues, but there's a huge population of people who are like, what? There's spring football? And are the New Jersey Generals in that XFL thing? Or, they don't understand that there's a difference between the leagues. They're unaware of spring football in general. Or when it's on, what networks it's on. So even just accidentally bumping into it, it's so easy sometimes to say each league and wonder, okay, can they get their share of the pie? And maybe by having two of them playing at once, we're actually increasing that piece of the pie. That's my hope anyway.
Because I believe it was in the listener, Seth, I think was the one that sent it to me that during noon on Saturday, there was like 1.5 million people watching some form of spring football at any given, which for you as a historian here, thinking that we would ever get to that point has to be kind of monumental.
Yeah, especially in today's splintered media lineup, there are so many more things to do than there were 40 years ago. So I think comparing the ratings from 3 to 5 years ago is so difficult. But live sports is one of those things that still can bring an audience. And absolutely, 1.5. The XFL didn't see that rating since maybe week 1. So it's helpful. It's helpful to have both of them going on at once. We're increasing the size of that pie a little bit.
In terms of the football gameplay here, New Jersey Generals really seem to kind of lament the loss of friend of the show Luis Perez. Dakota Prukop was in there, kind of one of the CFL guys. Generals, losing, didn't really seem to have a lot going. What did you make of them here, and who are they playing this week? They've got they're playing the Breakers, they're playing the they're playing the Maulers here at Canton.
Well, somebody's probably going to look better. So that's the good news. The Generals, rough game. Couldn't convert on 4th down in important situations. Otherwise, they were kind of in that game. You didn't really fear that passing attack a lot. Darius Victor led the league in rushing with, I believe, 84 yards in week 1, but a big chunk of that came on one play. So there was very little continuity to that offense. They look like they struggled a little bit more than I thought. They've got a really good head coach in Riley, and I thought that they look a little bit better than that to begin with. Pittsburgh, same story, different day. Offensively, how many quarterbacks are they going to cycle through this year? I saw and I'm going to cut the head coach some slack, first game. But just because it's a guy's turn in the rotation doesn't mean you put him out there for the last drive. He completed a third of his passes. He averaged 1.9 yards per attempt. He never should have been out there on that last play. Morgan had improved throughout the game. That was your better chance to win the game. I didn't understand that.
Well, it is. It's hard on here because we've seen that. I think less in the XFL, and I don't say any league or team is wanting to win more or less, but you do. I feel like you see a lot more of the hey, we got to give both of these guys equal reps in the USFL than like Seattle. DiNucci has never not seen the field, right? And as long as these guys are healthy, they've never not seen. DC uses it for strategic. They're not just okay. We're pulling Tiamu here. We're putting in Derek King. Why do you think USFL coaches are more apt to do that?
I wonder to a degree if they just don't feel they have a standout, because it is weird, and we see that two quarterback play used in Houston as well in the XFL. And I think both Houston and DC have done it so tremendously in situational play. They don't have to give the guys equal reps, but they bring in the guys when it makes sense. This is our guy with the better legs. He presents a different threat to the defense. And it doesn't mean that Derek King in DC, for instance, is always going to run the ball. We've seen him beat the defense, with throws. So I would like to see a little bit less emphasis, on just getting guys reps and more on going with the hot hand. And I think that's kind of what we saw last year in New Jersey with Perez. Pittsburgh, I think, I'd like to think that if the head coach had to do that over again, he would have made a different decision.
It's just crazy here. The modeler, we can change. A Tiger can't change its stripes, right? We can get the new uniform on and the new coach, and we're still the same lamenting woes here.
Yeah, and they scored a couple of, I don't want to call them gift touchdowns, but touchdowns that you wouldn't necessarily have anticipated, and still, you get beat by a late drive, just in a painful way, and we'll see if it changes throughout the rest of the season.
I don't, obviously you follow all the leagues. What did you make of, McLeod Bethel-Thompson here, journeyman coming in, getting his, I didn't like when I turned it on and I heard Kurt making fun of McLeod for playing with the metric system because he threw the ball over the line of scrimmage. I didn't appreciate that. And that's the kind of thing that CFL homers should get mad at, and not me for talking about alternative football. But what did you make of McLeod?
Started off rough and then really improved. And what I love to see, kind of my MVT moment, was that head first diving first down on the game-winning drive. I mean, there you see a guy pouring all his competitiveness, completely unfamiliar with his teammates. Yeah, there's going to be some stuttering with that offense to begin with, but you saw that competitiveness and that fire on display. And when he dove for that first down, I had very little doubt that they were going to score. It just was one of those things where I'm like, yeah, the Breakers did a good job getting this guy.
Well, I think it speaks credit to him. I mean, he is someone that's been poo-pooed his entire career in the CFL. And, to come in as an older guy in the locker room, and we have quarterbacks already, and we've got players and continuity and kind of all this stuff. And, I think he is a real locker room leader there. And I think even if he doesn't play all 10 weeks here as a starter, I think just having that presence there is going to be valuable for kind of, growing all of those guys together.
Right. And, when you look at this from kind of a spring football perspective, and there in some camps, you almost have this feel that every guy out on the field should be some kind of NFL prospect, a young guy developing, and he's trying to get to the NFL. But I think that there's a great place for guys like Bethel-Thompson who want to play in front of his wife and young child. I mean, that's awesome, and he can get out there and he can perform, and he can lift the level of play in the league. So I'm so happy to see that the USFL made room for a guy like that.
A couple last things here. Obviously, the Stallions losing Jamar Smith this week, I think it seems like he's out, or at least out indefinitely for the long term. Alex Magoo, looked good. It's hard. I mean, now you're trying to repeat, and what do you make what the Stallions are going to do?
Right. And, if I'm defending the Stallions, I defend that quarterback run first and make Magoo beat me with the pass. You can say that a couple places around the USFL, but I think it does change the equation a little bit. And Birmingham, credit to the defense, maybe that alone is enough to lift them. but we'll see throughout the rest of the season.
Anything else? Any other kind of general thoughts, broadcast thoughts, XFL thoughts? Anything else you want to share?
It's super fun. You switching back and forth amongst the games. It was just really interesting to note the contrast between the XFL presentation and the USFL presentation, as well as the XFL's, with the season winding down and a couple of home playoff games at birth, and just the energy and the excitement. And then contrast that a little bit with the USFL Sunday games, where that energy and the excitement weren't necessarily as high in those venues. But a couple of great games on Saturday for the USFL as well in front of crowds. So, the thing that struck me was that we are seeing almost this unprecedented weekend of spring professional football, with two leagues competing in a way, but, really putting their best foot forward. And, I enjoyed it tremendously.
It is weird to me. We have talked, and everyone has talked attendance and, the no energy and all this stuff to death. Highest rated USFL game was that Houston, Michigan game with absolutely no one in the stand. I think it was 964 on NBC. So we talk it to death, but it's I don't know if it's just because it's that time slot and people don't care. That's just bizarre to me. That probably the least amount of fans at the highest viewed game of the weekend. Yeah,
and that can be a blessing and a curse. You have your most fans watching a game that didn't necessarily have the same energy level as some of the other games, especially the two USFL Saturday games. And again, the broadcast windows are different. You had 3 network games for the USFL. You had 1 for the XFL. So those numbers are, somewhat different. And, I think both leagues, as we look at the schedule, even for next year, assuming that both come back next year, we'll look at any overlap and try to figure out the best way to handle that. There was a lot of energy, in those XFL venues this past weekend. And I don't know if I still have like some kind of PTSD from the COVID era, where I just don't want to see empty stands. I don't want to see them. I don't care if there's little groups of people scattered. It's way better than just seeing empty stands.
No, I mean, Andrew Murray was on the stream this week, and he said, it reminds him of the NFL in 2020, and how many NFL 2020 games are you going back and watching highlights of, or whatever. It's ingrained in people's minds at this point. But Paul Reeths, I really appreciate it. OurSports Central and StatsScrew.com. Anything else? Thank you so much.
Just totally enjoyed it, and looking forward to another full weekend. XFL playoffs on the horizon. I think we're going to see these USFL teams gel a lot faster than we did last year. So hold on, just hang in there. I know a couple of the offenses were rough, but I think that they'll gel a lot faster.
Yeah, I mean, the XFL is really peaking right now, I think, at a good time, and I think the USFL will have its time to shine as well. So it should be
That's
good.
Exactly right.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, Reed, thanks for having me on.
Well, when I reached out to the Stallions, they said, this is the one guy you want to talk to. So I said, all right, perfect. We have Brandon Aubrey here. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. Just wrapped up the day with meetings and practice.
It's good. So we're back here, season 2. We had the big, premiere games here over the weekend back in, Protective Stim. How is your life going right now?
It's going well. Feeling a lot more comfortable in season 2. Got some of the kinks worked out in the first year. Feeling a lot more confident and a lot less nervous going into week 2.
I should say yes, and congratulations on your USFL, 2022 season champions here with the Stallions. I know you kind of, transitioned out last year, and that was kind of the big story. Obviously, now having a year under your belt, but what was last year like coming in? And I'm sure quite the learning curve.
Yeah, last year was quite a whirlwind. Not a lot of time once we got here to sit down and really learn football, and then learn what my role was, how to practice, how to be a pro in this sport. So it really took a lot of time in the off season reviewing what happened over the course of the year, figuring out what works for me, and what I needed to improve on to have a better chance at making the ultimate goal, which is making that transition into the NFL from here.
I'm sure you shared the story a lot last year, but just for our listeners and viewers transitioning from soccer into football, what brought about that change?
Yeah, so I had 2-year professional soccer career, and when I was done with that, went on to software engineering and did that for a year and a half. And the whole time I was doing that, I realized I had taken maybe my professional sports for granted and wanted to make the transition back, and maybe wasn't quite ready to go back to soccer. Might have burned out of that. So figured I'd go something adjacent, because I've always loved watching football and really felt like I'd take a gamble on myself and move towards kicking football as opposed to playing soccer. And it was a natural transition, but the hardest part is getting someone to take a chance on you when you have no background, obviously. So I got pretty lucky having some connections through Notre Dame kicking world, and Skip Holtz obviously went there.
Well, it's cool because, we cover, XFL and USFL and CFL, and having these leagues to give players, for a myriad of reasons, kind of these opportunities to live out their dream or try to find a new dream. I mean, did you ever think back, playing soccer as a defender, that you would be kicking, that you would be a world champion here in an alternative football league?
Yeah, absolutely not. The thought never really crossed my mind until watching NFL games, working as the software engineer, like I said, and my family pointing out, hey, we think you could do that. I know you're not super excited in your current role as a software engineer, so maybe go pursue that. And through hearing that a couple of times, I said, why not take that gamble and go do it?
I spent time with Toronto FC. We cover, we cover a lot of the CFL leagues there. We've got the Toronto Argos and kind of all that stuff on. And so, would your family think you were crazy when you said, I want to go play professional football?
They're really the ones who pushed me towards it. I thought they were kind of crazy at first, knowing what it took to get to a professional level in soccer and how many years and work that took. So I kind of thought they were the crazy ones, but they pushed me out there, and I stuck with it. I spent about 2.5 years training on my own before even going through all the circuits, and then going to combines and events, showing in front of scouts, in front of other coaches. It took me about a full year of doing that workout cycle before I ever got a look and drafted eventually into the USFL. So it was quite a time commitment, and my family actually were very supportive. They'd seen me succeed as a soccer player, so they knew I had the potential to do it if somebody would give me an opportunity. And finally, through the perseverance and their support, I was able to stick it out long enough to get that opportunity.
I've heard a lot about Coach Holtz, and players kind of love playing for him, even when he was introduced as one of the coaches last year, and kind of his enthusiasm, and I think really buying into the whole experience there. Talk about him, the rest of the coaching staff, and kind of everyone they have to help you guys out.
Yeah, Skip has been incredible. He is exactly that. He's a player's coach. He really knows what we're going through, and has a good sense of how the players are feeling throughout the season, from week to week, day to day, and tailors our practice schedule to that. So maybe if guys are feeling a little nicked up, ramping down practice. If it's getting a little lackadaisical out there, ramping up practice and dropping periods if we need to, ramping up that intensity if we need to. So he's been great about that. And we have all of our position coaches are following that lead as well. And I can say I work most closely with Coach Bones, our special teams coordinator, and he's been fantastic in that as well. He's been a great mentor for me as a kicker that played and won the Super Bowl with the Cowboys, actually. He's been great for me, kind of guiding me through what it looks like to be a pro kicker in the next level. So it's been absolutely great. Our staff is wonderful, and they're a major part of why we've been so successful.
In terms of coming back this season, and what's it like to feel like homecoming? What does it feel like here? Coming back to the hub here. It's slightly different this year, and then we have the multiple hubs. But what's it like coming back home?
Yeah, it's been awesome. It's been a lot calmer here with just 2 teams as opposed to 8. So it's been it feels like we have a space of our own. We're not waiting for meeting rooms, not trying to find practice fields all over the place. We've got Protective and Legion when we need it that are always there. So it feels a lot more stable, a lot more like home, and just a lot calmer. And I think we've kind of got those issues ironed out that we had last year with the schedule. So it's been a lot smoother, and it's been a lot of fun. I love the city of Birmingham and living here.
It felt like, having the games come back on this weekend when I watched the Showboats game and then the Stallions game. And, it just like Fox really knows how to put together a broadcast. I mean, I think they're able to highlight you guys. And obviously we've had some of the commentators on our show, and it just feels like they're able to tell your story, right? And being able to highlight, this is where Brandon came from, or this is where, Jamar came from, or kind of wherever. What does it feel like knowing that you're, kind of on the national spotlight in that way on Fox and NBC?
Yeah, it's been nice. I've had a lot of my friends reach out to me. I know the broadcast has been very kind to me, and have done a good job telling my story, which is great for me. I love the publicity, and it feels good knowing that you've got the premier broadcast. They do our games the same way they do the NFL games, and that's a good feeling knowing we have that support there, and that the league is really putting in capital to showcase us and tell our story.
You were the one, it was last year, right? And you had punted and then had the big tackle, right? Saved the return. I'm connected.
Yeah, on a kickoff. Yeah, my first tackle, I kind of just threw my head into his head and didn't know what I was doing, but got the guy on the ground, and I think I got the job done. And then the next week they showed me how to properly tackle so I don't hurt myself.
Well, yeah, because that's the thing. I mean, I think you soccer players get kind of, bad rap sometimes. It's a lot of flop, whatever. I mean, are you out there trying to kind of dissuade that and show like, no, I am tough. I am able to kind of.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm a big guy compared to the returners. I'm 6'3" myself, 210 pounds, and the returners are probably around 5'9" on average, maybe like just under 200 pounds. So I think it would be a bad look for me to shy away from them in the open field. So I'm going to give it my best effort, and if my form doesn't look quite right, I mean, as long as he gets on the ground, it's good in my book.
I've never tackled a man, so I'm certainly not going to critique you how to do it. In terms of, we were out in Birmingham last year. I was with my wife on spring break. This year we didn't make the trip out, but I saw a lot of the festivities leading up to it, right? A lot of your world champion, Stallions, kind of all that stuff. What was it like just kind of being a part of all of those festivities?
Yeah, it was fun. It was good to go back and relive those moments and enjoy them with the team and the guys that were there, because it's kind of a real whirlwind at the end of the game. We were over in Cleveland. The game's over. We have kind of that night to celebrate, even though it's a little bit late, but you celebrate with the guys, and then we all hop on a plane and go our separate ways. So it was nice to have those activities set up for us to go back and relive it and take it in, celebrate it, and then close that chapter and move on to the next year.
I think, and obviously we've lived through kind of this graveyard of spring leagues with, like AF and XFL 2020 and, 2001, kind of all this, to have a championship team be able to come back and be able to, I think, be like adequately honored, right? And kind of just respected in that way. I think it's just a cool thing for like the history of spring football, right? So I mean, you guys are kind of etched in that stone here as one of the rare, few right now. They're able to get that. I mean, the teammates. I mean, how do you guys view this, or do you talk about it? Does it mean? What does it mean to you all?
Yeah, I don't know if we fully appreciate that in the moment. Right now, just focused on really repeating and defending as much as we can. Maybe when we look back in the future, we'll see in the history that we really were what you said, the first spring league to finish and be able to win is a special thing for us.
Coming out looking strong, for week 1 against the Generals here. What was any nerves, any rust? Kind of. There's a lot of I think weight on your guys' shoulders to show strong here again this season.
Yeah, and I think we did a good job not buying into that. I think Skip mentioned we're not going out there to defend a title. We're not going out there to win the season today. We're just going out there to try and go 1-0. So that's our mentality, and we're going to look at that each and every week. Just go out there and try and be 1-0. Try and not bring up last year whatsoever.
In terms of your own personal, you've talked about your growth and wanting to to kind of experience now and move to other things. What are you looking for goals this year? What would be a success for you?
Yeah, a successful year for me is winning all of our games. Kind of, you never want to miss a field goal, obviously, but doing what I need to do, get my job done, lead the league in kickoff average and starting field position average, and going for that all pro again would be absolutely massive for me.
Any thoughts on the new kickoff rules or anything this year? Another move. I mean, obviously you're kind of living through all this as a new, but moving it back, kind of creating some more space in that way, further distance. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's fun. That opening kickoffs are, the most explosive plays in the game. It takes a lot of energy, and for me as a kicker, it gives me an opportunity to showcase my leg. You hit a 80-yard ball, get a touchback. That's really, really hard to do, and I think we've had 2 of those in the league so far. So that's something that I want to go out there and showcase I can do as well. But it just gives you a chance to just showcase your leg.
Showcase your legs, strong stuff. Well, I appreciate it. Anything else before you go? What are you keeping yourself occupied with when you're not at practices or camps right now?
Yeah, so it really eats up most of my day in the meantime. But when I have some free time, it's just watching some TV shows, hanging out with the other specialists, and maybe sneaking around to golf when we get a chance.
That's good. Well, we have lots of special teams friends of the podcast here, both in the USFL. You'll know Matt Mangle over with the Maulers. He's a longtime friend of the show. So I appreciate always making those connections that way. Brandon, big game this weekend against the Showboat. So I hope you guys have fun. It should be a good one there at Protective Stadium.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks. Good luck.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Big special thanks again to everyone for coming on. I thought Dean was fun. I think Dean gets just so much grief from me, tweeting, from everyone during the XFL games. I think he carries that, carries it in stride. I think Dean's fun. I think I cracked Dean up a little bit, so that's always fun as well. Huge thanks to Ben Fischer. I know he made a lot of time for me this week. They're working on the big conference and getting ready for the commander sale and all of that for the Sports Business Journal. So huge thanks to Ben, Andrew, as always, for coming on. We definitely want to get Andrew back on when the XFL season ends and kind of see what happens with the USFL TV ratings at that point. Cole Cubelic, we've been going back and forth for weeks. I know Cole's a busy guy, and that means a lot, him taking the time. And then obviously Paul Reeths, always love to check in with Paul, and then Brandon Aubrey as well. Even a player interview, what would you imagine? That's going to do it for me today. Really exciting times right now. Really exciting. I feel optimistic about it. People kind of in my private life will know I've sent some messages of some cool things that have happened recently, and it just means a lot. We work really hard on this show, and I appreciate everyone's support. We did our big USFL live stream before the kickoff last weekend, highest viewed one of anyone doing that. That means a lot. You guys checking that out and everything else. Kraken, if you don't have an NHL team, give your good vibes to the Kraken. Hopefully we'll be 2-0 by the time you hear this, but either way, whatever works out with our game with Colorado tonight, should be an exciting series, and just happy to have the Kraken be part of the conversation. So that's going to do it. I've been really happy this week, very emotional with a lot of stuff, good stuff going on. So thank you guys as always. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.